seriously, I just like to drive fast. And I found a legal, safe place to do it was on a racetrack. So it wasn't a really complicated thing. I didn't have a grand vision. It was just a logical progression to a certain degree. I went to the Indianapolis 500 for the first time in 1966. Thought it was the most fabulous thing I did. The smells, the sounds, everything just resonated with me. You know, I took piano lessons for 13 years. I went to a girls' school. Because of that, I got sports. Had I not gone to a girls' school at that time, because it was before Title IX, that would have meant the only sport that the public high school offered at that time was cheerleading, and I am not the cheerleading type. So I did everything that I think society had expected of me, and was just, you know, like a lot of young people, and, you know, listening, you know, to some of the stories today, and just the one here that, you know, sometimes you don't know, you're just looking, what is that thing I'm really meant to do in this world? What is it that I am actually meant to be here, you know, and I just kept looking, and nothing was fitting. And of course, when you also think back of that particular era, you know, back in the 60s and even in 1973, women were not even allowed to get a credit card in their own name unless it was co-signed by a male that was a financially responsible person, a father or somebody else. So this was just a time when women were not necessarily empowered, and, you know, as I said, I was just trying to do everything that society expected me to do, but still trying to find out what I was really meant to do. And so I realized that, you know, and one of the benefits, I guess, of getting older is that you can start to look back, because I was always looking forward. And now that I look back, I realize that I was part of a future that happened for women, and I feel like I was able to make my sort of a contribution along the way. And I think about, and then the next question I get once, you know, the first question is, how'd you get started? How did you get involved? You know, I don't have a dad that did it. I don't have a brother. I didn't come from money. I mean, I was everything wrong. I started late in life. I was in my 20s, wrong gender, you know, not had the financial background and all of the things that normally happens when you take this sport on. The next question I get is, well, what's it like to be in a male-dominated sport? And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's a male-dominated world. And, you know, it really is something that again, in looking back, I realized because of the fact that in the 70s, you know, that all these things that women didn't have, I was just able to kind of be a part of that. And that's sort of where I'd come up with, how do you create a new future, but you got to do it with horsepower. I mean, you have to find your power. So where do you find the power? Well, I think the first thing is that you have to have goals. And once I realized that it wasn't just a dream to be a race car driver, I went to the Indy 500. Women were not even allowed in Gasoline Alley. There were no welcome signs. But at the same time, when I found out that actually people drove race cars as a hobby. You know, you didn't have to do it as a professional. And so I became a member of the Sports Car Club of America, because that was the type of racing that you could do as a hobby. You saw my first race car in the video. It was a Pinto. So I started at the very bottom of the ladder. And I was able to work my way up as an amateur and win races and, you know, accomplish some things. But then I realized I started to get some really significant goals of what I wanted to be a professional race car driver, because I was, quite frankly, tired of racing a Pinto and then a Vega, thinking, you know, is this all there is? And I didn't have the financial backing or the wherewithal to be able to make it any better. So I said, the way to fix that is to actually race in professional races. Well, that takes a lot more money. And so I was fortunate to be able to get Ford Motor Company, after bugging them for 3 years. There was an article in Car and Driver magazine that I read entitled Ford and Feminism. This was in 1978. This is when women represented about 20% of the car buying public. But there was this article that said that Ford wanted to provide equal employment opportunities for women in non-traditional areas, and they wanted to sell more cars to women. I'm like, here I am, you know? Win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Well, I got letters of no. But at the bottom of the letter, it said, but keep us informed of your progress. So my timing wasn't right. So I didn't just keep them informed of my progress. Every time I raced, every time I think I even went to the races or whatever, I was constantly letting them know, bugging them, reading trade publications, trying to find out who else I should send a letter to, you know, getting another name, because I found out no is only no from that person on that day. You can always go back, and if you got somebody else you can go back to, that also helps. So I was very, very relentless and very persistent. Was successful at getting Ford as a sponsor in 1981. But that's when I had this sort of switch that happened in my head. I realized, okay, Lynn, that's what you want. You want to drive a race car. You want to drive professionally. If you're now a works factory driver for Ford Motor Company, this is really great news, but the only way you're going to keep them is if you understand why do they have you? What's their goals? So that's when I realized, and again, I didn't necessarily think this all through, but now I realize when I look back, I was smarter than I guess I realized I was, because I realized that you have to align your goals with the goals of your partners. If you don't, at some point you're going to go in different directions. You're not going to reach the full potential of what you can accomplish. So Ford had to sell their dealers on the fact that they were into racing because they had been out of racing for decades, or for at least a good decade because of the fuel crunch in the 70s. They had to get the media on board. It wasn't just about win on Sunday, sell on Monday. They had to really get their stakeholders, which meant they had to get people like myself to go out and talk to dealers, to go out and talk to the media, to go out and work more on the internal stuff rather than just getting in a race car. So I found that I had to really find out why they were in racing and what could I do for them to accomplish their goals. Another partner that I got later was JCPenney. I got that in 1992. After driving an Indy car for the first time in 1988, I just wanted to drive an Indy car. I'd raced for Ford in all these sedans. And sedans I wasn't complaining, okay, but had a lot of victories. Everything was really kind of pretty exciting. But I was getting older every year. I started kind of late. And I was getting antsy. And an Indy car was like the ultimate race car. And I just thought, it's the first race I'd ever really seen. And, I wanted to bring full circle. And Ford wasn't into IndyCar racing, so that wasn't going to fit. So I just kept bugging team owners. I just want to drive an Indy car. Well, finally, in 1988, Dick Simon, who was a successful team owner, who I think just got tired of me, bugging him. At the end of the season, I got this phone call, and he said, "You want to drive an Indy car? Show up at Memphis." I thought I didn't even know there was a racetrack in Memphis, but there was. I found it. And the next day I went to Memphis, and I got to drive this Indy car, and it was the most phenomenal thing. It was like, this is exactly what I meant to do. And, of course, I felt that way, but that was just the personal feeling. But what was really good news is at the end of the day, Dick Simon, team owner, looked at me and said, "We can do this." He didn't use the word "we." And that's when I realized this could be possible. Then I only needed one more thing. It was $1 million. That's the amount of sponsorship money it was going to take to be able to campaign an IndyCar. So I went to work. I continued to race for Ford. 4 years later, 150 no's. I got a yes. 151st company that I went after for sponsorship over a 4-year period, and it was JCPenney. And before I got the yes, though, I had to ask them a lot of questions. And I found out that they had a campaign that they actually owned the tagline to, or whatever that's registered, but they really didn't have a national sort of image or a national campaign around it. It was called Spirit of the American Woman. And so by asking the questions, I now again thought I'm aligning myself. Why? I know that why I want them to be my sponsor, but I need to find out what I can actually do for them. And they said, we really don't have a national presence with this Spirit of the American Woman campaign. We let all of our local, our store managers figure out what they want to do in their own way. So next thing I know, I thought, Spirit of the American Woman on the side of a race car, Spirit of the American Woman on the wall that ABC television, millions of people are going to see. This will give that identity with the JCPenney. Not only that, they can't put a guy in the car. So I figured this was a really good idea. So I aligned myself with that partner. The last partner that I had in my racing career was Yellow Freight. And this was in 2000, which turned out to be my last Indianapolis 500. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what happened. I was able to get sponsorship with Yellow Freight, and again found out that they had an initiative to get more women on over-the-road truck drivers, and they had a campaign called Yes, She Can. And so it was another alignment. So throughout my 25 years as a professional race car driver, I really, really realized that my goals were very important to me, and I had to have strategies and all the things that we learn in business school and all the things that we understand that we have to have, but it was really aligning with those goals of my partners. Otherwise, I can tell you, Ford Motor Company, I had 15 years with 1-year contracts for 15 years. With JCPenney, I had 3 years, 1-year contracts. So, you know, you don't have that sustainability relationship if you don't really understand what they're getting. And with Ford, I went through 3 chairmans, which was leadership changes, strategy changes, and everything. So I have to admit, from a business standpoint, I was pretty proud of that. Another thing a word that is commonly used, you know, you have to be successful, is commitment. But to me, and I found out, the commitment is really, everybody says, I'm really committed to make this happen. I really want to make this happen. We really are committed as a team to pull this program together. The reality is, commitment is a pretty kind of shaky word unless you're really willing to put everything on the line. You have to put things at risk. Otherwise, you're really not committed. You're just giving it a good effort. And best effort isn't good enough. And so, you know, commitment has represented, you saw the crash in the opening video. This was a crash that happened at Phoenix International Raceway on a practice day. I'm in the kind of where you see some white and pink car, punched a hole in the wall. The car that you see all the flames around happens to be Buddy Lazier was driving that car. This was in March or April of 1995. Buddy Lazier broke his back in 15 places. It was his end plate came off the rear wing that caused his car to just literally just drive right in front of me. I punched him. We ended up in the wall. So it was nobody's fault. It was a mechanical failure on his part. Neither one of us knew it happened. I'd known Buddy for years. I knew his dad. He's in the hospital. I felt awful. Just totally destroyed my car. That May, 2 months later, Buddy Lazier won the Indy 500. So failure is going to happen. If you are not committed and you haven't put it all on the line, then you are not going to succeed, but you in fact may fail, even with that commitment. And when I learned about commitment, I was driving a race car. Because whether it was my Ford Pinto or an Indy car, you're either on the throttle or you're on the brake. You turn, it isn't like, maybe I'll turn here a little bit. You know, there's no maybes, there's no gray area. You're not just sort of, you are committed is absolutely when you know you're 100% on the throttle, 100% on the brake, you're turning here. They have to be precise, they have to be exact, they have to be commitment. The car doesn't know whether a girl's driving it or a guy's driving it. It doesn't say, oh, I got a chick driving it, so I'm not going to give it all my horsepower. But a car does know if you hesitate. The car does know if you're not confident and if you're not sure of the movement that you're making in that car and the inputs you're giving it. And it's just amazing how, you know, everything gets loaded, everything works, everything happens if you're committed. And that's when I learned what the word commitment was. Because believe me, when I first started racing that Ford Pinto, I was not committed because I didn't understand what all that meant. So commitment is when you put everything on the line. You're willing to risk it. You're willing to accept failure. And failure, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Henry Ford, is failure is that you have the intelligence to begin again more intelligently. So it's going to happen. It's what you do about it. It's what you do with it. And the fact that Buddy went on to win the Indy 500 that year, to me, was a strong testament to his commitment. I actually raced in the Indy 500, and obviously not in that car. So, and this was in 1995, and I had 7 Indy 500s total, so my commitment was there as well. Passion. Obviously, I had a huge passion personally. I mean, this is me in the very beginning in my Ford Pinto. But, you know, it's how do you actually bring that passion, spread that passion, and make everyone else have the same passion. One of the things that I'm amazed at all of the comments that I've heard today is how, even though the passion may not have been there in the beginning, it was sort of something, whether it came through an education, whether it came through some knowledge, with Tim with the balls, it's like, but then this sort of common energy started to happen. You know, this sort of thing happened around where really all of your partners then become passionate as well. And so, you know, it's very fine line that you just take your own personal passion, and if you keep it private, it's very difficult to accomplish, I think, the things that we all potentially can accomplish, as opposed to really, really feeling that passion and spreading the passion around to everyone. So it's a simple word again, but one that I think you have to make sure you share that passion and find other people that have a similar passion. And of course, happiness is a good thing. And so this is one of my favorite photographs, only because I hadn't even qualified yet for my first Indy 500, and I was, just the fact that I was literally going down pit lane and that line for qualifying, I was leaning on a whole stack of tires, and And I realized that, the joy that you can get out of accomplishing a goal, and again, having JCPenney, having Ford Motor Company, having all those partners around me, I think that, they were all there. And one of the goals that I didn't understand, by the way, about JCPenney was when I got them as a sponsor, I couldn't figure out why we weren't in all the stores. This wasn't like some big national campaign because they had the Spirit of the American Woman on the side of the car. What I found out after I ended up winning Rookie of the Year, I ended up getting invited to come to the JCPenney headquarters. And I met the chairman, W.R. Howell, who at that time had a commitment to increase more women at top-level executive. They only had 2 of their top 100 executives were females, even though their customers and their store managers were. And so, one of the reasons that he used that campaign for me to be successful at the Indianapolis 500 was that he basically used that as an example of why there was no reason why women shouldn't be more at top-level executives. Remember, this is 1992. So that's another, where you've got to constantly learn and listen about, because sometimes you have to maybe adapt the strategies of what you're trying to accomplish to help your partners accomplish their goals. Communication is key. We all know this, but it's because it really you have to communicate what you've done. What I found out is that, you work so hard at having those goals and having the plan and the strategy and adjusting it and everything, and then you realize that not everybody knows what you're doing. And so, I found out that you have to tell people what you're going to do, and these are sometimes your own partners, because they get off busy doing their other projects. Then you have to go out and do it, but then you got to tell them that you did it. You have to come back around and tell them what you've actually done, and that's hard. Sometimes it feels like bragging, it doesn't feel right, and even though in today's communication world is certainly a lot easier than it was even back in the 90s, I realize that you really do have to sort of spread that word and continue to engage your partners in the success that you are having. I mean, whether it's signing autographs at the racetrack, or in this case, Ford Motor Company did a pretty good job of utilizing the relationship I had with them to actually communicate about safety. So it was constantly reminding of any success that you have, any project that you're doing, that you make an inroad somewhere, that you're able to make sure to come back and tell them, because we almost forget that because we know it, we figure everybody knows it, particularly in today's world of all the mass media and all the communication that's available. And then, remember I told you got to tell them what you're going to do, then you got to make sure you do it. So the results, and they have to be measurable and accountable. I feel sometimes pain for great ideas, great theories, great concepts, great solutions in the world, but then they don't happen. They don't happen to the impact that they should, and so the results aren't there. And then when the results aren't there, it falls. It falters by the wayside. And I think that, I remember I wanted to win a championship. I remember I didn't win my first professional race for Ford Motor Company until 1984, and I got them under contract in 1981. Boy, was I sweating bullets in 81, 82, and 83 on one-year contracts, but didn't have that victory professionally until 1984. But, fortunately, I kept the communication line open. Everybody understood what was going on. Ford hadn't had race engines forever, and we were getting blocks out of junkyards. I mean, it was a real kind of it was a shared disaster, shall we say, for those first couple of years. But it was just really important that I got the results. And I think one of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that any executive or any people that I've worked with, even on my crew and on my team, because a lot of times I would get a new team at the beginning of the year, a new group of people, new crew working on my car. And when I was with Ford in most of my career, I was in a multi-car team, meaning you have a big team, and then within the team you have a crew that's assigned to you. So your teammates are also your competitors. Well, oftentimes the guys that were assigned and gals that were assigned to me, it was like, oh, we got the girl. They weren't necessarily enthralled by the fact that they didn't get who they thought were going to be the top dog, because everybody wants to be with a winner. But when we got results, all of a sudden the attention started to come to them because we were getting the results. And so when you out-qualify your teammate that was supposed to be the one that was the hot dog that was going to win, all of a sudden things started to change. So results are critical. And you have to then find the results. I was looking for the results on the racetrack all the time because that's the measurement that I had. But then again, I realized Ford was looking for exposure. Some of the results were not always just on the racetrack, but they wanted that Ford oval on the cover of magazines. They wanted, that sort of message and that imaging. So I had to make sure that I was not only valuing our program based on my result system, but I wanted to make sure that I was measuring it by theirs as well. So I think sometimes we get so caught up in the passion and in the doing that we forget to actually, demonstrate and share and communicate the results. So today, I think I'm pretty proud. I am pretty proud of the fact that I started this out as nothing more than a mission, a personal mission. I want to drive fast and not get tickets all the time. I want to be able to compete. I became one with the car. I found out, this is who I am. I just want to race on Sunday. Okay, I'm still racing. I found out old race car drivers get to drive old race cars. So I just raced a 1977 Formula Atlantic Chevron. It's got, fortunately, a little Ford engine in it. But the reality is that's not what it's all about. It kind of feeds and fuels my fire. But today, what I really realize is that, the world is changing, fortunately. I talked about the fact that in 1973, women couldn't even get a credit card in their own name unless they had a co-signer that was a male, responsible male. Well, today, women run run financial institutions. They're on boards. The whole world is certainly exploded there. Also, history was made in the year 2000. The Indy 500 was the first time that 2 women actually started the race. It was myself and Sarah Fisher. Little cute side note was that I was the oldest and she was the youngest. I said, we're the bookends. And to this day, this year, it was the 100th anniversary of the running of the Indianapolis 500, and there were 4 women in the field, and to this day, 7 women have actually competed in the Indianapolis 500. And after many years of trying to get Billie Jean King, who beat Bobby Riggs, by the way, in 1973, that sort of started to change, that was part of that change agent and changing the world, I was able to have Billie out as the honorary chair for qualifying at the Indianapolis 500. And so she's there with Danica Patrick, Sarah Fisher, and Mocha Duna, who were qualifying for that year. So, the world has definitely changed. I feel that we did sort of change the landscape. And, there's been so many different areas that women have completely, we were talking about healthcare and, where there were just so many of them where women were either minorities and now have sometimes even become the majorities. I'm also proud to say that because I started a foundation, 501c3 called Women in the Winner's Circle Foundation, and we are now training young up-and-coming drivers. I've been doing that for 15 years. And Danica, who I'm sure you all have heard that name, we started working with her when she was 14 years old. So she started racing when she was 10. And I worked with her pretty significantly in the early stages of her career, as well as Sarah Fisher and many of the other drivers out there. So now I can mentor and train and give back to the sport that was really, really so good for me. So the world is changing, and it is pretty exciting to be a part of it. Moms and dads are now saying it's okay for our daughters to do what's always been okay for our sons to do. So we have young girls now racing from the time they're about 5 years old, and they represent about 20% of the actual body of motorsports and racing. So you got little kids running go-karts and quarter midgets and all the grassroots type of racing that I never had the opportunity to do, but that because I said that now that moms and dads are saying it's okay for our daughters to do, I can be supportive and really be able to give back. So I think that sometimes when we are changing the future, we don't necessarily see it. I didn't see this, did not see it coming, didn't predict it, was relentless because of my own personal desires, but realized that it also has impacted society. It has impacted how other people think about women. We did a market research survey online a couple of years ago about what was the view, what was the attitude of race fans about women in racing. And I was kind of like, I've had friends tell me, Lynn, don't ask the question that you may not want the answer to. And I was a little worried. And 70% of our respondents were male. And I can say that about 95% of it was positive. And the anecdotal comments, one of the things that really blew me away was when a number of the comments said it wasn't just because it would change and provide opportunities for their daughters or for young females, but the fact that it would change the way their sons would look at women. And so I realized that by seeing women on a racetrack competing successfully, equally, that in fact it changes the way even little boys might be looking at what women can do and all that. So it's a sport that's still got a mystery about it. It's sexy, it's glamorous, it's exciting, it's dangerous. So it's the fantasy of a lot of different people. So I think we're still kind of out there showing the world that it is I call it a gender-neutral sport. As I said, the car doesn't know the difference. And I've been fortunate because to start as a little girl that went to the Indy 500 and couldn't get into Gasoline Alley or couldn't go anywhere, to then ultimately not only race in the Indy 500, but race 7 times there and 15 IndyCar races. I learned that, and this is just one of my quotes, is that you better be sure whether the moment defines you or you define the moment, and not let the moment define you, but you always know who you are, and you can define the moment of who you are. So it's a sport that I love. I'm glad I found it. I'm glad it found me. And I'm glad I had a chance to share it with you. Thanks very much.